Hello and welcome to Neography A to Z. On this channel, I take an analytical approach to reviewing the functionality of invented writing systems. That is, writing systems that were explicitly created, engineered, or invented for a constructed language, or to be used in place of an already existing system. I also review these systems for their aesthetic appeal in a less analytical way, but relying on decades of in-depth study and work in the field. This episode will focus on reviewing the Romulan script, developed by Trent Pearson for the show Star Trek Picard. The accompanying language has been used in multiple other shows, but information is sparse. Fortunately, Trent participated in the quote-unquote conlang adventure earlier this year. A few clips from that virtual event are included in this review. Trent is well known to the older conlang community as his page on Idrani has been up for quite a long while. His work on the Romulan script is not surprising, as he has demonstrated an admiration for this style of script and emulated it in his own works. On the left here we see Eha, his Romulan version script. The artistry of this script is interesting, even if it is based on previous designs seen in Star Trek media. The Romulans, as a species, go back to the original series, but the language was only fragmentary until Trent was hired to recreate it, and he did so by including and incorporating those pre-existing fragments. The original script, on the right of the screen, first appeared in the Next Generation series episode Face of the Enemy, aired February of 1993. It was, like the majority of scripts in Star Trek canon, only set dressing until Trent was hired. Now we'll take a look at functionality. On March 22nd and 23rd of 2025, William and Yvonne Morton hosted the Conlang Adventure 2025 in a Zoom conference. Trent Pearson was a guest speaker, and he explained the Romulan script that he created. So let's hear him explain the functionality.
Okay, so in the first section, I'm just going to go over the Latinization. The Latinization was developed to make reading Romulan simpler for actors and artists, scriptwriters and scenic artists, and it just assigns Latin letters or digraphs to the phonemes of the language. So you'll notice that in this chart, some of the glyphs that are large, that are the Latinized glyphs, have more than one phone below them. And that's because I'm trying to just sort of give a shorthand way of showing some allophonic variation. So these Latinized glyphs will make any and all of the sounds that are below them, depending on the environment. And I'm not going to go over that in this presentation, but it's just important to understand that that's the case. The DH glyph is archaic. That doesn't that's not used a lot in Romulan. That's old. And to be honest, this came from having to back engineer something that a writer did with a name. So we had to add this in, even though there was nothing else in the language that really used it. And I had to go backward in time and create some words that had this archaic glyph and sound in them, even though they weren't part of what I originally created. So whenever you see Romanized or Latinized, however you want to say it, Romulan, this is the system that we use. And this sort of became the de facto alphabetical order of Romulan. It's actually really just English alphabetical order, but it's the voiceless and voiced consonants, and then the rest of the consonants after that. And they're just paired, if that makes any sense. So that's the Latinization that we used. If you scroll down to the next section, so Menfar is the native word that means Romulan, and it can be used as both a noun and an adjective. There are two forms of writing. One form is abjatic, And it's not a pure abjad, but the purpose of this writing is to be practical. So the way it basically works is that every syllable has to be written with only 2 glyphs. If the syllable begins and ends with consonants, so the onset and the coda are both consonants, those will be the 2 glyphs that are chosen for writing that syllable. If the syllable does not have a consonantal coda, then an abbreviated vowel that you can see at the bottom of this chart, it may not be showing completely on your screen, I can't tell, but will be used only in that case. If there are any syllables that end in a diphthong, only the last sound of the diphthong will be represented by the vowel. And there are some allowed consonant blends that can fill both the onset or the coda space. In that case, it would be only the first consonant of the onset or the last consonant of the coda that would be used to write it. So in all cases, you are writing only 2 glyphs per syllable. You'll notice too that there is a null consonant, looks kind of like an H there in the chart. That's for any syllable that does not have an onset consonant. So this is the abjadic form, and this would be used in places where there's high demand for practicality, like a military vessel, in business, in trade, so forth. So all the sounds are represented with these glyphs, and a lot of these glyphs have a remnant of something that Monty Thrasher created. So this is a little bit of a tip of the hat to him. And if you look closely, so like for example, if you look at B, it sort of looks like just a horizontally flipped B. And T looks very much like a T. And F looks sort of like an F that's been rotated 180 degrees. Does that make sense? So some of those are left over from Monty Thrasher's work, and they can be a good mnemonic to help you remember the phonemes of these glyphs. Okay, if we go down to the next section. So this is traditional Menfar, and this is where more of the aesthetic of my own conlanging comes into play. So with this set of glyphs, full syllables are represented, and each syllable is written in a vertical block that has the onset at the top, nucleus at the middle, coda at the bottom. So you have a larger upper and a smaller lower form. And you'll notice too that for any of the consonants that have an extender, like B and F and K, they will have a 180-degree rotation when they're on the bottom, so that the extender becomes a descender instead. And these are written in syllabic blocks from left to right with spaces between words. Again, you can see there is a null onset for to fill the onset position in syllables that have no initial onset, but you never write a null glyph in the coda position. If there's no coda, you simply don't put anything in the lower position. You can also see that there are vowel symbols for all 4 of the cardinal vowels, as well as independent ones for all of the diphthongs. The cardinal ones are exactly like the cardinal vowels in my AHA script. They're pretty much identical. The diphthongs are not. Their assignments are different, and some of them have slightly different forms. The vowel on the end, that is actually specifically for making certain consonants into complete syllables. So it will either make them ejective, which is what the glottal stop actually represents, or it will add schwa to them and they'll become their own syllable. But to the Romulan mind, that's the same thing. That's the same sound, so to speak. That's one phoneme. And that's important. There are several important grammatical components that utilize that, and so it's important to understand what that is. Now, these forms are based off of a whole backstory, which I'm afraid I can't share it with you right now because of NDA, but they stem from a tradition of calligraphy and from a historical backstory within the Romulan world story that make them hard to write unless you're using calligraphy instruments and special equipment. So if you scroll down to the next set, this is how you would write them by hand or with a stylus where you have just a point, so like a pencil, a ballpoint pen, or something like that, some kind of stylus. So you can see how these are somewhat similar, and they give the same effect as those calligraphic forms do, but they're much simpler and they're very much easier to write if you have just a pencil or something like that. So these can be written. This is obviously the traditional set, but if you wanted to write by hand and abjadically, you would write them like the upper glyphs here, only they're slightly taller than this, so they should basically be square. And when you're writing the abjadic glyphs, any glyph that has an ascender, so like B or F or K, that's still, even with the ascender, it still fills the square space. So the little ascender fills. The ascender fills about a third of the vertical space, and then the rest of it fills 2/3, if that makes sense. And you would only write abbreviated versions of the vowels, which I'm afraid I didn't include in this document, but this allows you to do some handwriting.
Here are a few samples of both Minfar scripts for the sake of comparison. As you can see, though they are stylistically very similar, they do function differently enough that reading and learning them would be noticeably contrasted. The handwritten mode of Minfar is interesting in that it seems likely that this format would simplify even more than what we already see on screen. Now we'll go over the aesthetics. Multiple props and pieces used in the Star Trek Picard series feature the Romulan script that Trent made. The value of a working writing system in a complex narrative cannot be understated. Much of the story is enhanced and becomes more impactful when interlaced with artifacts and props that help explain the quote-unquote alien culture. The image above is a technical readout on a Romulan spacecraft. The lower image is a sign on a building written in both English and Romulan. I don't think it needed to be English, but I also realize that they want the audience to know what they're looking at. The number of Romulan items used in production for Star Trek Picard is extremely impressive and speaks to Trent's contribution and creativity. This is what having a fully fleshed out conlang can do for a show. It can give it a depth and realism that random sounds and symbols simply cannot provide. Trent's artistry brings a level of realism and cultural identity to the Romulans that species such as the Ferengi or Jem'Hadar or even the Klingons simply lack. Due to how recent Trent's version of the script is, there are no available images of anyone with a tattoo representing his script. However, on the left, here we see that a set dressing script is alive and well in this tattoo featuring the emblem of the Romulan Star Empire. On the right is a more recent version of the Romulan emblem. There are a multitude of Romulan-related products online, from costumes to posters, mugs, and models, but none of them currently feature Trent's creation. Who the heck knows why? But it's most likely due to the newness of it, or the studio holding on tight to the trademark for some unknown reason. Regardless, I would imagine there is quite a big market for such things. The range of applications with a script such as Trent's are obvious when the technical Romulan readouts are seen in contrast to the artifacts created for the show. It's truly great work when a script maintains its aesthetics in various mediums. This script definitely accomplishes that goal. While the script was expressly commissioned for the Star Trek Picard show, Trent has also created his own artifacts using his version of the script. I'll let him explain.
And I did. So this is a copy. I'm sorry I have to do it this way, like I'm reading you a book in first grade, but this is a copy of the scroll done by hand, so using calligraphy. This is one of the leaves in the scroll, and then I converted that into a digital format. And these Romulan books can be either read like a codex, or they can be fully pulled out like a regular scroll. But so this has the this has the same story, but this is a digital form that I've gone through and taken all the hand copied parts and turned it into a digital one that could be published, really, if they wanted to. That tells the story of the split from Vulcan. So that one goes on and on. And then when the story of the Koat Milat was brought up, and there was a particular showrunner who had a lot of involvement in that, and he was very interested in that. He made it clear that in Romulan culture, the Koat Milat were unique because they were in direct opposition to a deeply held cultural schema that was held by the majority of Romulans, which is geared around ideas of layers and secrecy and codes and masks and disguises and so forth. So the Koat Milat believe in absolute honesty and transparency all the time. But most Romulans don't. That was this showrunner's instructions for me. So I figured that most Romulans would be subject to a dogma that indoctrinates those ideas of secrecy and layers and so forth. So I came up with a mantra, and this mantra is also encapsulated in a scroll that people would have in their homes, and that they would periodically read this mantra to their children, and as adults would read it and would be almost like some kind of scripture or dogma. So I made these two scrolls. This is the first one I made, and this just rests. This would just sit on a table or a hearth or something, and this says the heart of the Romulan, or the Romulan heart. And inside this, you can take the top off and remove the scroll. And then the scroll contains the mantra. So I did this one by hand too. This is hand calligraphy. So I think it would be pretty easy to produce these two and have this be sort of a Romulan artifact that fans could have. that it could be reproduced in several forms, not as complex as this, but it could be done. Then here's another version that I did. This one's using the traditional writing on the plaque, says the same thing, Romulan heart. And then this case can actually come out of the cradle. And then this one, I just did a slightly different format where the scroll has 2 lines instead of 1. So this is a sample of the traditional writing too, with a little bit of decoration.
Anyone that enjoys Trent's work should definitely look at his Idrani website. He has work on around 4 dozen different types of scripts spanning decades. Although, during his interview at the Conlang Adventure previously mentioned, he admitted that it's been several years since he's made any updates to that site, so take all of the information with a huge grain of very old salt. A link to his site is in the description of this video. I rate Trent's Romulan script 4 out of 5 for functionality and 4 out of 5 for aesthetics. Trent's work is perhaps in the elite category of modern neographies. He devotes himself to the crafting of functional and beautiful systems that, when compared to many others, simply cannot be matched. His focus on the artistic side of scripting means that he can produce real-world artifacts that imbue the viewer with a sense of the language and especially the culture of that artifact. I genuinely envy his talent. Those are my thoughts on Trent's Romulan script. I'm interested in hearing what you have to say, maybe even about his Adrani work. Next time, we will be discussing the Xi'an system for the Star Citizen video game, created by Britton Watkins, so be sure to click the bell button to be notified when the next episode is posted. A bit of a different video this time, but I think it's going to be worth it. Ciphers can be fun. Not always, but they can be. So this episode, we're going to look at 3 systems simultaneously. Why, you might ask? Well, they're ciphers, mostly, but they appear in various sci-fi series of varying popularity with equally varying degrees of use and seriousness. Now we'll take a look at functionality. Before we get into these, let's be clear about terminology. I use the term cipher, but what I mean to say is substitution cipher. One of the more famous historical substitution ciphers is the Pigpen cipher, sometimes referred to as the Masonic cipher, Freemason cipher, Rosicrucian cipher, Napoleon cipher, and of course, tic-tac-toe cipher. These ciphers are usually very simple, meaning that with a pen and a pad, a literate speaker of the encoded language can deduce and decode the message or writing within a few minutes or maybe hours of first reading it. First up, we have the so-called alienese alphabet from Futurama. This is exclusively a one-for-one cipher used for English. The only significant feature here is the mostly developed punctuation, which lacks a question mark. I guess they don't ask questions in New York. Second, we have the Tinctonese alphabet. There are 2 versions, almost. If you look closely, you will notice that many of the quote-unquote cursive versions are identical, or nearly so, to their printed form. Specifically, B, Y, and M stand out as similar in both forms. Also note, while there are numerals, there are no punctuation marks in this system. Lastly, we have the quote-unquote visitor scripts. The top being from the original miniseries and TV show. The bottom is from the 2009 reboot of the TV show and is not an exact one-to-one cipher for English, but is still very much a cipher. Notice the lack of punctuation, but the odd inclusion of long vowels. You can also see that the 2009 version reuses many of the 1984 characters, reversed, flipped, or even rotated in some cases. What you see here are the 4 horsemen of the cipher lips. Anytime you see a neography, whether personal or for a piece of media that includes C, J, Q, and X, it's almost certainly nothing more than a cipher for English, or the language of whichever production it may be, perhaps even a Romance language. Art departments and production teams simply cannot help themselves, it would seem. Now we'll go over the aesthetics. While used mostly as a way for the writers to make inside jokes, the Alienese alphabet is actually the most alien looking of these three systems. It has complex shapes that, while thematically related, are divergent enough that it has the patina of a natural system. Many Futurama fans have adopted this script out of a love for the show. This script gives the creators of Futurama the ability to add a bit of depth and even intrigue into what is essentially a cartoon for teenagers. The design evokes a sense of technological uniqueness that is common throughout the television show. They have spaceflight on one hand, but the computer used to translate the script on screen occupies nearly half of a room. A tongue-in-cheek type of humor that marries well with the outlandish nature of the sci-fi comedy genre. The silly humor of the Futurama show and the otherwise meaningless nature of the Alienese cipher has done little to deter fans from getting tattoos to demonstrate their loyalty to the show. What I find interesting is the accuracy that these various tattoo artists display with the letter forms, because I would wager they most likely aren't familiar with the show, and even if they are, the Alienese alphabet is even less well known, or maybe due to the number of tattoo examples I was able to find, it's far better known than it really should be. And for the Futurama fan that simply must display their love of the show to everyone, you can get a nice welcome doormat in Alienese. And if you want to get your lettering perfect, you can also get this stencil so your journaling will be completely legible. Both available on Etsy. Moving on to the Tinctonese script. While it is unique, it's barely creative, resembling something like a heart rate readout, or polygraph, or maybe even a skilled etch-a-sketch artist. I don't know. But that didn't stop the showrunners from putting it in scenes on the very short-lived television show. Being used occasionally on signage and props doesn't make this cipher work any better, nor does it improve its appearance. Research indicates that the Tinctonese language, and I use that term extremely loosely, was nothing more than English syllables reversed with a few posteriori words, mostly coined on the spot or as needed during script writing. The intention to create an alien language, and to a larger extent alien culture, with this low level of effort, resulted in a laughable excuse for a script, and I would argue one of the elements that left the show, and the movie for that matter, with such a small fan base. It's simply not very inspired, nor does it help that the script is nothing but a poorly contrived cipher. Research for this video did not result in finding any human examples with Tinctonese tattoos, but we can supplement that with how tattoos were used in the TV show. It almost looks like they're paying homage to Charlie Brown's t-shirt on their wrists. Redbubble has a few Tinctonese items, but there doesn't seem to be much of a market for the newcomer swag. Now for the visitors. The 1980s version of V made little use of the cipher, as the theme of the show was far more dramatic and suspenseful than was related to the sci-fi aspects of the show. Also important is that the culmination of what the audience is told about the visitors' culture is that they are lizard-like aliens that want to eat people. Knowing that, and that they purposely gave their leaders very human, very English names, it makes sense that their language would barely even register as part of the story. Even when it did appear on screen, very little effort was made for it to be meaningful. These screen grabs you see here are jumbles of letters. The one on the top left includes symbols that aren't even on the chart for the original cipher of the 1984 version. These fleeting glimpses at an unusable and haphazardly designed system are more than disappointing. They're mildly insulting to the audience. But I digress. It was the 1980s. Who are we kidding? The 2009 version of the show was hardly any better. They used as little of the script as the 1980s version of the show, and research indicates even less effort to adhere to their own design. The efforts they did make were strictly to push the plot along, expositional in nature. And let's be clear, this script is hardly anything to brag about. It almost looks like leftovers from a casting of stencils for an entirely different system. However, Etsy and Redbubble are full of novelties for fans overcome by nostalgia. Alas, none of them seem to bother with any writing systems other than the alien symbol seen on the t-shirt. In this scene from the 2009 reboot, the sign in the background purportedly transcribes as, quote, "We are of peace," end quote. I guess this was meant to show the aliens' propaganda? The thing is, though, why is it in English transcribed? Why not an alien language? Or even better, just use the Latin alphabet. Oh, that's right. It's all just set dressing, like ciphers. Thank you for watching. I'm rating these scripts all together. 2 for 5 for functionality and 1 for 5 for aesthetics. The Alienese script only gets a nod from me for its aesthetic appeal, which is barely there, but it fits the show it's used in. The other two are horrible. I can tell that the initial designs were likely an attempt at something very cool, perhaps unique, but budgets and time constraints likely led to some producer somewhere just telling the art department to come up with something easy and quick. As for functionality, it's only 2 for 5 because it's pretty difficult to mess up a cipher, but as I showed, it wasn't for their collective lack of trying. Those are my thoughts on these sci-fi ciphers. I'm interested in hearing what you think, maybe even just about the TV shows in general. Next time, I'll be discussing Kellen by Sylvia Sotomayor. So be sure to click the bell button to be notified when the next episode is posted. Thanks again for watching. This video will be a slight departure from most of the reviews on this channel. We're going to talk about two scripts in sort of a competition for which is worse, aesthetically and based on the stated goals of each one. Shavian and Deseret are both attempts at phonemic, or to some folks, phonetic, writing for English. This video was requested by the Neography A to Z Discord community members, but I must admit, I really like this idea. If you enjoy this type of video, please make sure to let me know down in the comments. Both Deseret and Shavian were developed to replace the Latin alphabet. Neither were successful, but for very different reasons, most of which have to do with a lack of interest and a general tendency to adhere to traditional English spelling. Each claims to cover, quote, all the sounds of English, end quote, but seem to focus on the specific dialects, shockingly, of their respective creators. The amusing thing about the dialectal variation here is that Brigham Young most likely sounded closer to a Brit than many other Americans at the time, having been born in New England in 1801. George Bernard Shaw used Pitman shorthand for years in his own works, but found it unsuitable as a complete replacement for the Latin alphabet. Upon his death, his will stipulated that the New English alphabet be created with a grant from his estate. The result was a four-way tie that was remedied by Ronald Kingsley Reed, blending the various winners into what we now know as the Shavian alphabet. Deseret was created with what we'll call religious overtones by George D. Watt at the direction of a committee made up of the Board of Regents of the University of Deseret, which included Mormon church leaders like Brigham Young. Their work was primarily and originally inspired by Isaac Pitman's English phonotypic alphabet. Rob Words has really well done videos about both Shavian and Deseret. I highly encourage everyone to check those out. A link to his channel is in the description. Now we'll take a look at functionality. Both Shavian and Deseret function as alphabets. Some folks might refer to them as phonetic or phonemic, but those words have meaning. Phonemic spelling, for example, is when graphemes correspond one-to-one, or at least very closely one-to-one, to the phoneme, which is rare in natural language writing systems. Phonetic transcription is when the graphemes are used to represent the sounds that humans are capable of making. If we consider all English dialects, it becomes clear that neither of these truly represent all sounds within the Anglophone diaspora. Heck, they don't even have the same number of symbols. Shavian has 48, and Deseret has 38, or 40 with the later additions. Here's a pangram, developed for Shavian, but also rendered in Deseret. It's plain that neither offers any functional advantage over the Latin alphabet. Disregard that the pangram is nonsensical. Its purpose is to display as many characters of the script as possible, if not all of them. Keep in mind that these two have different numbers of characters, so do they capture all the possible sounds of English in practice or only in theory? These two maps, the one on the left being of the British dialects and the one on the right being the various North American dialects, don't even cover South African or the various Indian English dialects, the Australian variations, New Zealand, etc. English is widely spoken as a first language on almost every continent, and the differences aren't simply lexical, they're phonological. Now, the variations are often very subtle and not truly divergent enough to warrant completely new spellings, but that's what you get with phonetic and especially phonemic systems. Unless, that is, you have a standardized spelling, easily recognizable across dialects, like the one we already use, with some rare exceptions like honor, color, defense, license. These divergent spellings are mostly thanks to Noah Webster and speak more to the American Rebellion than anything. It's important to remember that throughout most of the Anglophone countries, British spelling still dominates. While the pushback against standard criticisms of both systems are that it's okay neither script is actually phonemic because they are meant to aid the learner in a deeper understanding of English phonology. This might have been a helpful take if these efforts had been widespread or popular, but when you have small pockets of speakers trying to influence a larger group, the tendency is for the larger group to prevail. The scenario is no different for writing than it is for language change. For reference, the use of emojis continues to wax and wane as many folks still either use acronyms or they spell things out for clarity. Ultimately, reforms in spelling rely too heavily on a small group or a small speaker group, meaning that its popularity never gains enough momentum to fully change or even influence the system. Now we'll go over the aesthetics. Aesthetically speaking, Shavian looks a bit like a first-time constructed writing system. Very simple lines, mirrored characters, and just enough thematic variation to seem plausible. However, it lacks the lived-in feel of a natural system, and the mirrored or rotated letters are actually far worse for folks with dysgraphia or dyslexia. It's a bit like Tingwar, but far less creative and almost the opposite of artistic. Its resemblance to shorthand may be purposeful, but it also makes it difficult to take seriously as an attempt to create a replacement for the Latin alphabet. Deseret, in contrast to Shavian, has more complex characters, probably too complex in many ways. As can be seen in this image, comparing the textual and handwritten versions, many of the letters almost become entirely different symbols. This speaks to the atrocious design aesthetic and the poor decision to have there be no descenders or ascenders. This script, while seemingly a true effort to replace the Latin alphabet, lacks a natural feel. It just looks fake. So-called cursive Shavian starts to look a bit more natural, but the reader needs to have their dialect decoder ring on so as not to confuse themselves. Also, even in this slightly more pleasing form, it still has a very fake appearance to it. I get a badly written Coca-Cola magazine ad vibe from the lower right-hand image. As can be seen here, G.D. Watt worked on a cursive version of Deseret, and frankly, it would have been easier to read a prescription from an orthopedic surgeon. It's difficult to take this script seriously when seeing its cursive form. It almost appears to be a simic and completely meaningless. When contemplating what might have been if this script had gained any significant traction, I get a slightly nauseous feeling in my stomach. Of course, obscurity only seems to breed fandom these days, as having a niche interest can be seen as edgy or cool, I guess. This tattoo only serves to bolster that hypothesis. However, I was only able to find one confirmed Shavian tattoo, weirdly enough, sported by someone that left the Mormon church. The tattoo on screen has Aaron in Shavian, Benjamin in Hebrew, and Okuyo in katakana, presumably a name or a collection of names. Amusingly, though, the person who posted this image on Reddit claimed to initially want the Deseret alphabet instead of the Hebrew, but the tattoo would have been quote unquote too long. While searching for Deseret tattoos, it became clear that they are very rare and mostly sported by folks that have left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Occasionally, they specifically get these tattoos as a sign of rebellion or symbolizing freedom from the church. The tattoo on the left says, quote unquote, think independently. Attempts to read the tattoo on the right, though, were unsuccessful. Now, if you're in the mood to blow through your paycheck, you can spend $30 on the Shavian hoodie that says Hail Satan, or $200 on the full-scale gold-plated pages of the Book of Mormon. I'm going to pass on both. It's difficult to pin down exactly which of these is worse, partly because neither of them became anywhere as widely used as they were initially intended. Also, neither of them are as linguistically developed as they might have been. However, Deseret was created based on Pitman's English phonotypic alphabet, and Shavian was clearly inspired by Pitman's shorthand. This doesn't make them good, though. This makes them both bad. Shorthand was developed before portable recording devices to capture speech phonographically, but this was done by journalists mostly, not linguists. Basing the decision solely on aesthetics, Deseret is grotesque and should be burned in a fiery pit. In terms of functionality, though, Shavian allows for variations in spelling that, while not entirely inexcusable, definitely detract from its usefulness. Deseret. I have to say, Deseret is the worst, hands down. If pressured, I would learn Shavian over Deseret. It's a pile of hot garbage. Those are my thoughts on Shavian versus Deseret. I'm interested in hearing what you think. Maybe we shouldn't be so hard on good faith efforts to improve spelling, ostensibly to improve literacy or something. Or we could recognize that spelling, even when weird or difficult, has the wonderful side effect of fossilizing etymology and language history. Next time we will be discussing the Atlantean alphabet from the Disney movie, so be sure to click the bell button to be notified when the next episode is posted. So this review will cover Sinyamda by Britton Watkins and William S. Anise from 2014, an original conlang and script made for a sci-fi movie called Sin, written and produced by Britton Watkins. As mentioned previously on this channel, Britton, seen on the left here, is a prolific conlanger and has contributed to movies, television shows, and several online projects. William is a coder by trade, but has also contributed to several online projects, as well as having created the conlang in the feature-length film Black Adam. Both Britton and William have been involved with the Language Creation Society since its early years. Many members of the LCS have gone on to work together on various projects. Now let's take a look at the functionality. Here we see the base symbols for Simyamda. It is an abugida. They are aligned in accordance with their IPA positions and their corresponding romanizations, with the vowels being attached to the bottom of the consonants and being written in a sort of full form when the syllable onset is null. Sinyamda uses a base 10 system, so the digits aren't necessarily anything special. However, they do add a bit of naturalism to the overall writing system. The punctuation. Quote, the equivalent of the comma is a single raised circle, and the equivalent of the full stop or period is two horizontal circles. The equivalent both of the colon and the semicolon is two vertical circles. The question mark is a raised circle with a vertical line underneath it, and the exclamation is an inverted triangle of circles. Quotes are mid-level horizontal circles at a slight angle. Capitalization is marked with a small dash above the initial letter. This is not used at the beginning of sentences, but is confined to proper names, such as resh, in the first and second person singular pronouns, od and er. Here we see a chart with all of the consonants and all of the vowels written out. Take note that the double consonants have a line to the left of them. Looks different in the cursive version, which will come up later. Also take note of all of the diphthongs and how they are marked. Now let's take a look at the aesthetics. When deciding on a system for the Sin movie and the Sinyamda writing system, Britton decided to use a Japanese-style brush pen to establish some of the strokes and initial shapes and what they might look like. The result were these stacked syllables that ended up looking a little too Chinese-esque for the director, and so the design was later altered to establish a more abugida-esque style. The result is what you see in front of you here. Take note that the vowels have this 2- vowel carrier that is written when they are initial or there is no initial consonant in the syllable. Here we see a less flowy or a less brush style and a more textual style. Take note that again, the vowels have a two dash mark above them for when they are written independently or without a consonant preceding them. The most unique aspect of Simnyamda, both as a language and a writing system, is that they were created specifically for this one movie. There were no pre existing novels, and there's been nothing since either. If you take a look throughout the movie, you'll see that the language and especially the writing system play an important part in establishing the setting. As integral as the language is to the overall plot and the setting, it is not heard except in the characters' names. However, even in scenes such as the one on screen here, it is essential that we see the writing system as it gives us that alien-esque or otherworldly feel. So, at every opportunity, in every scene where it was possible, the language and the writing system were on full display in order to add depth and realism and sort of a living world in the movie. As you can see here, one of these is the side of a metal building, the other is a book prop that was used in the movie. You'll notice that there are different fonts. They made several fonts, which will come up later in this video, and each one of them was given the attention to detail that they deserved in order to give the language, and especially the writing system, a full breathing life of its own. One of the themes of the movie is, of course, control and propaganda, which I highly recommend you watch the movie. However, what you'll see here is posters that were created for the movie, one as an advertisement, the other as sort of an in movie or in world propaganda poster. You'll notice again, there are different fonts being used here. It gives this complete and total objective realism to what you see in front of you. The propaganda poster on the right is even aged to sort of look like it's been in an industrial area for a while. The end credit scenes, which I would highly recommend you watch the movie all the way through, are even done in Sinyamda. The titles of the folks, i.e., writer, producer, director, and then the character names, are all first rendered in Sinyamda, and then they transition to both English and the Latin script. It's very well done effect, and again, it leaves you with a sense of what you just watched was real. The next few slides are just going to be the various fonts of Simyanda, but I would like for you to just take note of the small, subtle similarities as well as the very, very subtle differences across the fonts. And then you'll get a sense of how they could each fit into a real world sort of situation. And if you think this is too much work, just keep in mind that there are literally tens of thousands of fonts for the Latin alphabet. This one is simply a thicker or a bold version of the previous slide, but I like the way that it has to change a little bit of the curves in order to maintain the overall design. It looks really good. This particular font jumped out at me when I first saw it because you can tell if you look carefully, it's a stencil font. If you can do a negative of this and cut the letters out, it'd be very easy to go around and stencil, spray paint and stencil this onto locations. And I'm sure that when they did the on location set pieces, that is more or less what they did in several instances. Maybe not on the metal pieces. I don't know whether that was special effects or whether they actually had a metal worker on site, but this stencil appears throughout the film, and I think it's quite well done. Here we see a chart of the original brushstroke font. This is probably my favorite next to the stencil font of the previous slide. I think that this one embodies both the naturalism as well as sort of like the artistry that Britton has demonstrated in several of his other projects. And I think that Williams' work with the language probably only added to the realism of this script being used throughout the movie. And you'll see in some scenes in the movie too, you'll see notes and sort of scribbles occasionally in certain areas, and you can tell that they were done with probably an earlier version of this script. It's definitely worth looking at that. This font of the script is just sort of a line drawing font. I like it because it makes the characters for each letter very clear and distinct, but I also like it for its simplicity. It's very easy to sort of distinguish one letter from the other here. And if you go back and you look at the previous couple of slides here, you'll notice the likenesses and the very serious changes that are made in order to get this simple line drawing font. Again, on the top here is the original sort of idea or the proposal. It was decided that it was too Chinese-esque or too sort of Hanzi-esque. I like it. I think it looks good. And you'll see that it sort of translates pretty well to these handwritten names that Britain included in the PDF, which will be linked in the description of this video. I encourage you to check it out. It works very well. The brushstrokes are natural without being forced, and you can sort of see how this might translate pretty easily into a quickly written script. So I'm going to rate Semyamda a 5 out of 5 for functionality. It is a pretty basic abugida, but all of the odds and ends were thought of and put in place properly for a well-functioning abugida. That's why it gets the 5 out of 5 from me. As far as the aesthetics go, the fact that there are at least 6 different fonts for this script is absolutely mind-boggling and amazing. So, and that one of them is a brushstroke style is just top-notch artistry and work on the part of both William and Britton. So that, again, the aesthetics gets a 5 out of 5 from me. This is probably one of the highest rated scripts that you'll ever see on this channel. I do like the conlang that was developed for the movie. I don't like that it really wasn't used except in a written form for the movie. I think that maybe you should have had a couple of characters speak it just to sort of give the audience a feel for what it is they're reading. I also did watch the entirety of the movie in preparation for this review, and it's not a great movie. It's not mind blowing. There's some aspects of it that I think are really good. I do think some of the actors were trying their best, and they're not going to get an Oscar, but they did work really hard. I think that the direction was really well done. I think the story is very inspirational and unique. But overall, it's not the best movie you're ever going to see, but it's also not a waste of time, especially if you're looking for unique sci-fi stories that resonate and that you use original ideas and concepts, most especially conlangs and conscripts. I do recommend you watch it. There will be a link to the movie on Tubi. It is available on Tubi right now. I highly recommend you check it out. Those are my thoughts on Semyamda. I'm interested in hearing what you think about the script. Make sure you stay tuned for the next script review, and be sure to click the bell button to be notified when the next episode is posted. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I very much appreciate your time, and thank you for watching. As a note, all relevant links used in the making of this video are in the description. All information is the property of its creators and is openly available online.